This is the Devil's Guide to Bards. Devil's Delegate here, and this is part 3 of my in-depth look at the Masters of Control, Buffing, and Social Situations. Today I'll be examining the Bard colleges, and ranking them because that's a fun way to compare and contrast them. If you'd like some context for my rankings, take a look at my other Bard videos, and at my video ranking all the D&D classes. Links in the description. The Bard subclasses really cover a broad range, with the highest fighting it out for best subclass in the entire game, while the lower ones are in competition for the very worst spot. They don't take it, but they're down there. But saying a Bard subclass is bad is very different from saying a Rogue or Ranger subclass is bad. They need their subclasses, so a good one is necessary for an effective character, but Bards don't need theirs. The Bard base class alone is better than most class and subclass combinations. So a Bard college being bad is fine. Choose whatever piques your interest and you'll still be effective. Now there's some caveats with that. First, some subclasses use the same resource as the base class, so in using features from that subclass, you are actually making the base Bard weaker. Monks suffer from this as well, and it pops up a bit for sorcerers. For Bards, the resource is Bardic Inspirations, which are really powerful. So when you get a feature that uses your inspirations, you're not actually being given a new feature. You're trading for one. So the overall quality of what you get is equal to how good the new feature is minus what it cost you. And inspirations are valuable, so it will cost a lot, making even a great feature not that good in the end. And in some cases, what you get can be less than what you spent. In those cases, your overall character can be worse than if it had no subclass at all. That is, if you use the subclass feature frequently. The second issue is that some subclasses are, or contain, traps. And yes, this does partially overlap with the first issue. That is, they suggest a style of play, or worse, a way of building the character, which makes the result weaker than the base Bard. Now these are more of a problem for new players who will reasonably assume that consistently using what you're given will be better than not, and that playing the character the way the flavor suggests will result in a character that can do what the flavor suggests. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case, and there are multiple subclasses where the character will be much stronger if built to be a normal Bard and played that way, with the subclass features only being used in special circumstances. I've seen this with new players who end up very disappointed with their character and the game, and never realized how much power they had. Alright, for each of the colleges, I'll mark the features as blue, being good, or light blue, being great, green for okay, and red for bad, with orange for the very situational ones. One last note before digging in, and that's that this is a Bard subclass ranking, not a ranking of Bardlocks and Bardadins, or any of the numerous multi-classes that grab a bit of Bard. I'm talking about how to make a great Bard even greater, not about how to improve a Paladin. And I mark down any subclass that requires you to multi-class to be effective. If you can only use your subclass features well if you take a level or 3 of Warlock, that is not a good subclass. So, in last place, it's the College of Swords. College of Swords earns its place at the bottom by leaning deeply into both the problems I mentioned before. Its features want you to trade your Bardic Inspirations for new features that often are less effective than the inspirations would have been, and this is the iconic Trap subclass. The subclass tries to turn you into a melee fighter, but it doesn't give you enough. Turning a class into the opposite of what it is requires massive features. Think the Hexblade, and those aren't here. Sure, a Swords Bard is better in melee than a base Bard, low bar there, and that might confuse a new player into thinking it's good in melee. But he's not. Put the Sword Bard on the front line with a fighter and a barbarian, and they're just going to laugh at him. And if he's up there, wasting his time swinging a sword, it means he's not using his actions to do what he actually is good at, which is casting spells. And if he did cast a control spell, his concentration would probably be knocked out of him. Bards max out Charisma, which is not a weapon stat, meaning they will be worse than martials at hitting opponents. If a Swords Bard wants to compete with a weapon, they'll have to make Dex their primary, reducing Charisma, and thus making the character worse at spellcasting and skill use. And that doesn't even work, since a lower Charisma means fewer inspirations, which means fewer uses of the key subclass feature. This subclass makes the very sad, that's single attribute dependent, Bard class into a mad class, as now you need a high Dex, and a high Charisma, and a reasonably high Con, and you can't get that with normal generating systems. The features: bonus proficiencies, medium armor, no shields, and the scimitar. And you can use your weapon as a spellcasting focus, which would be practical if your other hand was holding a shield. I have to give them points for remembering their own focus rules, as they forgot them in 2 subclasses. Aren't I being severe marking this as red? Isn't medium armor a good thing? Yes, it is, but it isn't enough for what this subclass is trying to do, and it's a major part of the trap. Additionally, we'll later come to a college that gives something similar, but more, making this inferior by direct comparison. As for the scimitar, it means nothing. It's a ribbon feature, or a joke. You've already got a rapier. Also at 3rd, you get a fighting style, a pared-down version of the fighter's fighting styles, without the ranged option, leaving only dueling and 2-weapon fighting. This is useless unless you are running into combat, where you'll be beaten to a pulp while doing minor damage, instead of the powerful things you could have been doing. This is even more of a trap than the proficiencies, as you should never use this, while you should wear the armor. And correcting an error I've seen multiple times with Swordsbard players, you cannot use dueling with a distance weapon. And one more 3rd level feature, at least you get 3, Blade Flourish, which I could also rate red as being part of the trap, and this is where you trade away your ability to be a great bard, but there's some use here and I think the point's been made. Your speed increases when you make a weapon attack, and you can spend your inspiration die on yourself to increase your damage and do one of 3 things. Defensive Flourish, raise your AC. Slashing Flourish does tiny damage to a second target. And Mobile Flourish pushes someone, though this is designed poorly as the push is 5 feet plus the number rolled, which could be a 2, so push 7 feet. Most everything in this game is done in units of 5 feet. How are you going to use that on a grid? In any case, Mobile Flourish and more, Slashing Flourish, are pitiful uses of your inspiration die, a powerful resource that's just wasted here. Defensive Flourish, however, isn't bad. You shouldn't be finding yourself in melee, but if you do, adding your inspiration die roll to your AC will keep you alive. Well, it will for the 3, 4, or 5 times that you can do this before you run out of inspirations. Strange note, while this is clearly meant for melee bards, that's not rules as written. Unlike the fighting style, you can use your blade flourishes with a ranged weapon, and you'll be better for doing so. 6th level grants extra attack, 1 level behind the melee classes. And sure, hitting twice with a weapon is better than hitting once, but using a melee weapon is still not a good idea. You're weak and ineffective in melee, just now, times 2. It would be different if the subclass had supplied longbows and the archery fighting style. Oh, and the bard can only use Blade Flourish once a turn, so that extra attack is going to be pretty unimpressive. And finally, Master's Flourish. You can use a d6 instead of your inspiration die for your blade flourishes, which will make your flourishes weaker, but you no longer run out after a few uses, and if you use this, you are no longer paying the price with your inspirations, which makes you much better at supporting your allies, if you're doing it. Too bad this comes on so late in the game. The only effective way to use this subclass is to wear the armor, stay far away from melee, and focus on spells and inspiring your allies, and then get a bow. It should be clear, as a bard, this college stinks, but it has its uses. Just not for a bard, but for a hex bard or a rogard. That is, for a multi-class where you are essentially playing the other class and raiding the bard for a few goodies to add to it. For a bard lock or barded-in, the college's swords can be workable. A straight bard is still a more effective character, but you can have fun with a melee mutt. Coming 7th, it's the College of Whispers. This is another trap subclass, but it's less of a trap than swords, so it ends up above it. This is an odd class that drags you in 2 opposite directions, which is better than dragging you in a single wrong one. One feature is all about combat damage, and the other is heavily social. The normal take on this class is that it's really good in an all-social espionage campaign, but no good in an average campaign. But I don't find it all that good even in a social campaign, where other colleges supply more without pigeonholing. It starts with Psychic Blades. This is the rogue's sneak attack with uneven and jerking scaling, and without the requirement to have advantage. That's a substantial damage boost, more than our swords bard, but again, it costs inspiration dice. Do this, and you're trading away one of your best bard abilities for just some damage. And you can only be a foe rogue for 4 or 5 attacks, and that's per day before 5th level, or fewer times if you're raising your dex so you have a reasonable chance to hit your enemies. You don't want to build a character around such a limited ability. Any other bard subclass could just give an inspiration to the party rogue, and when it turns that rogue's miss into a hit, the bard's done as much, or more, damage as using the inspiration for this. At least the lack of a proper defense is less of a problem, as Psychic Blades works with ranged weapons. If you don't build for it, nor plan to use it all the time, this isn't a bad ability to have in your back pocket, just in case. Also at 3rd level, you get Word of Terror. After speaking to a humanoid alone for a minute, they make a wisdom save or become frightened of you or someone you choose for an hour. I like the picture this conjures up, very worm tongue, but the mechanics don't work. Don't confuse flavor with ability. The frightened condition causes disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls and stops the target moving closer to the source of its fear. That's it. That's all it does. It doesn't cause the frightened person to do or think anything. So unlike Charmed, Frightened is mostly only of use in combat. If you're trying to be Wormtongue and influence the king, you're much better off just using persuasion and deception checks. So what you want from this feature, most well-built bards already have. And the condition goes away if the target is attacked, damaged, or its allies are attacked or damaged. So you can't even use this to set up a battle. And to make it more awkward, note that the target has to be alone with the bard for a minute. You like the feeling of this feature? Just make an Eloquence bard and roleplay it. At level 6, there's Mantle of Whispers. You can wear a dead person's shadow. Okay. This is a combination disguise self and speak with dead, or detect thoughts depending on your timing. Except it requires everything to line up perfectly and gives you less. If you want to impersonate someone, you have to be there when they die. How often does that happen? People who like this ability either point to a situation where you impersonate royalty that you just assassinated, which is the kind of thing that happens once in a campaign and could be better done with disguise self and detect thoughts. Or to kill a guard and take its place as you now know the password. Except the feature says you wouldn't know the password. You only know info the target would freely share with an acquaintance. So you don't really know much. I'd rate this as bad, except bards have such a limited number of spells that they can know that it's hard to take disguise self and detect thoughts, much less speak with dead. And while this is a limited form of those spells, you can use them multiple times a day. I kinda like it. It's not good, but it could be funny. And finishing at 14th, Shadow Lore. A save or suck ability, and the devil isn't fond of save or suck abilities, causing an 8-hour charm person where the victim is afraid you will embarrass them. There's a bit of bad design here, as it says the target obeys your commands, but then contradicts that by saying you can't make it fight for you. Okay, and then clarifies by saying it treats you like a close friend, which isn't enough clarification. Will it stop fighting your allies? I'd say no. Charm person doesn't, and there's been real-life wars with close friends on opposite sides. With the most generous interpretation, this is decent in combat, though not as good as multiple save or suck spells that the devil doesn't think are worth the bard even bothering to learn. With a less generous interpretation, it is definitely not worth the action to use. Out of combat, in social situations, yes, you can have fun with this, particularly with that 8-hour duration. The College of Whispers supplies extra damage that you're better off if you use infrequently, and situational social abilities that can be replicated by spells. But for an experienced player, this can work. Or you can just build a lore bard and take a couple extra fear and necromantic spells and dress it all in black and it'll do this all better. With swords they were trying to build something and failed. With whispers they never seem to have gotten out of the vague feels stage. However, like swords, the subclass is mostly for multiclassing. I saw a build video for a good whispers bard, which started with 5 levels of paladin. Yeah, that's not a bard. That's a paladin with bard sprinkles. In 6th place, it's the College of Spirits, and I hate that this ends up so low. I'd rather play a spirits bard than the next 3, but it has some problems. Again, there's a major feature that's a trade instead of an addition, and that feature is also random, and random things are less effective than something that can be counted on. The College of Spirits also suffers from design problems, as in the design team seems to have forgotten the rules of the game. Let's take a look. Guiding Whispers. You get the Guidance cantrip, and it works at a range of 60 feet. Guidance is arguably the best cantrip in the game, and makes so many skill rolls succeed which otherwise wouldn't. Now, since one person with Guidance can cover most uses of it, the feature is not as good if others in the party have it. But even then, it's still good, particularly on a bard who is not only well suited to it thematically, but has a whole lot more focus on ability checks than a cleric or druid. This assures that all your skill and tool uses will be buffed. Plus, there's uses for guidance that are good but rarely happen because it gets in the way of gameplay, like constantly casting it on allies in preparation for the unknown. constantly casting it on yourself is not so problematic, making it much more likely that you could have this going when initiative is called for. And yes, guidance works on initiative. The 60-foot range isn't a big deal, but might help every once in a while. I mark this as good. Figure this is a low good if others in the party have the guidance spell, and very high, slipping into great if no one else does. Also at level 3, there's Spiritual Focus, Part 1. This lets you use skulls and other spooky things as a focus. So, flavor. And here's where our first design flaw appears. There's a second part of this feature, but it doesn't come into effect until 6th. I'll cover it there. So why did they put it here? Well, because otherwise this isn't a feature. Who cares if a bard can use a candle as a focus? They needed to add some, even very small, bonus for using these new focuses that took effect at 3rd level. There's a third feature, and it's the defining one. Tales from Beyond. As a bonus action, you can roll an inspiration die on a table to get a random power that you can then use as an action until you roll on the table again or take a rest. The table surprised me. Usually I expect random tables to have some really good stuff and some really bad stuff, like the Sorcerer's Wild Magic table. But this one is filled with reasonably good stuff. It's all at least decent, and nothing's incredible. The effects tend to either do some damage or grant some temp hit points, but there's a passable variety. They are somewhat situational, but most will be usable, if not exactly what you wanted at the moment. I'd say the best is a 30-foot teleport, though that's also one of the most situational ones. If you need it that day, it will be great. If you don't, not so much. There's also one that grants a buff to intelligence, wisdom, and charisma checks. Pretty handy if you randomly roll that one when you are in a social situation. If you get that right before a battle, less useful. The other odd thing about the table is it doesn't scale well. Since you're using your inspiration die, when you get this feature, you roll a d6, so you can only get the abilities on the first half of the table. The 7th and 8th items are available when your inspiration die increases to a d8, etc. Except the abilities at the top of the table aren't particularly better than those at the bottom. The teleport is number 4. Of course, the big problem here is that these cost an inspiration. If you randomly get just the ability you need for the situation, then Tales from Beyond is well worth it. But as it's random, more often than not, the inspiration die would have been more useful used as inspiration, meaning a base bard is slightly better than one that uses this feature. So power-wise, it's not good. I'll still mark it as okay, partly because it's fun in gameplay, and if you use it sparingly, it might turn out to be an improvement. 6th grants Spirit Session. You get to choose a spell to add to your list, and you can change it every day. The spell's level is restricted by your proficiency bonus or below, so 3rd when you get this, and eventually 6th level spells. You also have to have a number of creatures equal to the spell level aid you in the ritual that gives you the spell. So this college isn't good for someone in a solo adventure. But in a party of 4, this won't be an issue until 13th level, and it requires a creature. By then the party should have a familiar or summoned steed that can participate. So that's all great. The real restriction is the spell has to be either divination or necromancy, and oh boy does that rein this in. You might think this would be great for swapping in whatever spell you need, but there's few of those situational spells in either list. Some communication ones, and detect poison in divination, but otherwise it's weak to higher levels, except for Gift of Alacrity and Fortune's Favor, definitely my picks, but as those are Dunamancy spells, they may not be available in your game. Necromancy does better, which is an odd sentence since the Necromancy list is infamous for being weak. The big get here is Revivify, and that's where this feature moves from okay to really good. A good primary healer for a party needs Revivify, and the only bards that can get it before 10th is the Spirits Bard and the Lore Bard. So if you focus on healing, move this feature to blue. And now we go back to Spiritual Focus, Part 2. I don't get paid for this. Wish I did. So I figure that people who do get paid should know the rules better than me, unless they actually know the rules and did this on purpose, which is worse. Okay, the feature allows you, when casting a spell using the Spiritual Focus, to roll a d6 and add that to 1 damage or healing roll. What's wrong with that? Well, you're probably not getting paid either, so you might not dwell on the focus rules. It happens I've run into them a lot before, so this hit me right away. A magical focus replaces the material components for a spell, and you can't use a focus unless that spell requires material components. So, how many healing spells have both a die roll and material components? Before 7th level, on the Bards list, none. 0. Zilch. Even off the Bards list, we only get 1 edge case, so basically nothing. And that single spell of 7th level or above is Regenerate. So one half of this feature is utterly worthless. Did they mean this to work with Healing Word and Cure Wounds? I think so, but it doesn't, and I also think they should know that. So this is a mess. Okay, what about the damage side? It's better, but not good. What spells work? Not many. No cantrips. And Symbol is hardly a spell I'd look to buff. And Heat Metal doesn't need it. Basically, you're down to Cloud of Daggers, Phantasmal Force, both of those spells the devil doesn't recommend for a bard, and Shatter, with Shatter being the only significant one. So this feature has some purpose, but not much. Which takes us to 14th level. Mystical Connection, which isn't a feature but a scaling of Tales from Beyond. Now you can roll twice and pick between the rolls. That's fine. The scaling should have been part of feature, and given something new here. The College of Spirits doesn't give much, and it needs a rewrite. As I like the basics, I fix it for my game, but that's for another video. As is, it comes in 6th. So at 5th we have the College of Valor. It's another trap subclass. This was the first of the melee bard subclasses, and most people hated it, for the obvious reason that if you build a melee bard with it, it's not much good at melee, and nothing in the college alters that. Eventually, it becomes clear that swinging a sword is a waste when you can cast Hypnotic Pattern and win the battle in one move. But the College of Valor isn't that bad. The problem was people listened to the flavor. You can make a good bard with the College of Valor, just don't make it a martial warrior. The college offers you some useful defense. Use that and then act like any behind-the-lines bard. So what does it give you? Bonus proficiencies, medium armor, shields, and martial weapons. Bask in the loveliness of armor and shields, and the higher AC they present. This feature existing is part of why I rated the Swords Bard's proficiencies low. Why take that when you can take this? You can mostly ignore the weapons, though maybe pick up a longbow. Note, here is where the ability to use a weapon as a focus could come in handy. Also, Combat Inspiration. Allies can use their Inspiration die to increase their damage or AC. It's nice to have options. Using Inspiration for damage is not the best way to go, but essentially allowing you to hand out 5 souped-up shield spells every short rest is quite good, and lets the holder of the Inspiration use it for whatever defense is needed. At this point, College of Valor is sweet. But not for long, with extra attack. And here the trap comes in. You can attack twice, a level after every melee class. I suppose shooting that longbow twice isn't a terrible use of an action while you're concentrating on a spell. I'm still marking it red because I'd want an additional feature here since this one should rarely be used. Plus, it's a trap and I need to point that out with one of these features. Never use this in melee. Lastly, Battle Magic. You can make a weapon attack as a bonus action when you cast a spell. It's okay, just don't use it for a melee attack. It says weapon, so shoot your hand crossbow. The extra damage you do is piddling next to the mayhem your spells are spreading, but it's free, so take it. Though if you need a focus for your spell, it may not be possible to get the free hand needed for a bow. So the point of this college is the armor and shield with a new way to use inspiration, and that's pretty good. If you have another way of getting armor and a shield, then this college is a bust. In 4th place, it's the College of Creation. This is for bards who want to influence reality itself with the Song of Creation. Well, kinda. The college is less focused than it should be. It's a little buffing, a little pet, a little utility. It works, but the devil would have liked it if WotC had worked with the theme a bit more and smoothed out the mechanics. It starts with Mote of Potential, 3 additions to the effects of your bardic inspirations. And that is additions, not replacements or trades. When someone uses your bardic inspiration for an ability check, they roll twice and take the best. If they use it for an attack, it adds a die's worth of damage in a 5-foot AoE. And if they use it for a saving throw, they gain some temporary hit points. The extra roll for ability check is really good. The other 2 are more situational, but both are decent. I can't say I'm very fond of the flavor. The description has a little mote, a note, or a star floating around the character. I know kids like this game, but do features need to come off that twee? Then also at 3rd is Performance of Creation. You can make a medium or smaller sized item of a limited value that exists for a few hours. The size and value rise with level, and it can be very useful. The feature points you to the equipment chapter of the player's handbook for examples of what you can make, but doesn't specifically limit you to just those. If your DM interprets it as a limitation, and some do, this loses some luster. Okay, so need a weapon? Make one. Need a ladder? Make one. Need a wall for cover? Make one. Useful, but not that useful. Most of the time, a bit of shopping will cover this. Doesn't your rogue carry thieves' tools? Check with your DM on if a kit is a single item. Don't you already have weapons? If your party is prepared, this will find less use. At higher levels, suddenly being able to make a wagon to carry your loot might come in handy, but put this down as situational, but for many situations. Note, whatever you make is clearly a magical creation. It sparkles and plays music, so no throwing off pursuers by making a barrel to hide in, nor can you sell what you make, so no art fraud. Why is that something players keep thinking they can do with this? Additionally, you cannot make a heavy object to drop on someone, your creation has to be on a surface, nor make a box to trap your enemies. Has to be made in an unoccupied space. Not that that matters since you're limited by the gold cost of what you can make, so at low levels, a plaster box is possible. Iron bars are not. Expect lots of arguing over the cost of items not listed in the player's handbook and what constitutes an item. Level 6 gives animating performance. Hey, you're Mickey Mouse in Sorcerer's Apprentice. You create a pet. Pets are useful. Rangers and druids have them, so why not bards? Of course, they get them earlier. And at level 10, via magical secrets, a bard can get a pet griffin or pegasus or rhinoceros, which makes this a little shabby, but this is 4 levels before then. And here I have a response to Treant Monk's comments. For anyone who doesn't know, Treant Monk makes fantastic D&D YouTube videos. I can't imagine anyone watching this doesn't already know him, but on the minute chance, check him out. Tons of great information and insight. But in this case, I disagree with him. But then he said he got the idea from someone else, so I can disagree with them instead. He said that this is a great feature because your animated pet can fly, so it's a source of concentration-free flight for the bard at level 6, since you can ride it. But he's making a huge assumption, that you can ride it. Nowhere does it say you can ride it. Note that the Drake Warden Ranger couldn't ride his dragon until a feature specifically gave him that ability. And anyone who's ever table surfed, that is attempted to stand or sit on a table as your friends run around with it, will know that riding things not meant to be ridden does not work well for long. There's a reason why people ride horses, not zebras. The default for anything in life where it isn't specifically made or trained to be ridden is that it can't be. So if you want to say that a character could attempt to cling for dear life to the animated pet, perhaps with a strength or dex check, then sure, that could work for some short-range flight. But riding into battle, casting spells, or swinging a sword? No. The capstone is Creative Crescendo. Now you can make a few extra smaller tiny items, and value is no longer a concern. So you can make adamantite walls. Of course, you now have spells that do that better. You can also make a boat, assuming your DM counts that as a single item. This makes your performance of creation feature really good, though it is anticlimactic to get an improved version of an earlier feature as a college capstone, like the Spirits Bard did. The devil would have liked something more. The devil thinks this college is a lot of fun and could be a riot in the right game. Its features tend to be less than a bard could do with spells, but spells are a limited resource, so our alternatives are welcome. And it has a nice style that should have been better. It's also a subclass that can cause a lot of bickering. The forums are filled with it. So check with your DM before taking this, and the devil does grade down a bit when features are this open-ended. From here on, we enter the stratosphere. These subclasses are good, really good, starting in 3rd place with the College of Lore. This is the college that gave bards their superb reputation. Lore was embraced by all, as well it should be, and the devil considers this the standard bard against which all others are measured. 3rd level gives bonus proficiencies, 3 skills. Nothing wrong with more skills, not that a bard needs any. Your basic bard already averages 6 skills, 4 of those with expertise, and all the rest half-trained. It really gives you half a proficiency in your 7th, 8th, and 9th choices in skills. Well, I'll take it. And cutting words. You can use your inspiration against your enemy's attack roll, ability check, or damage roll. This grants the bard some versatility. Debuffing the damage roll is almost never going to be a good use of an inspiration, and a bard will rarely have an opportunity to debuff an ability check, though you can take reactions to the call for initiative, so you can debuff an enemy's initiative roll. But mainly this is for nerfing an enemy's attack roll, which will decrease how often your team is hit. But this isn't an addition to the bard's inspiration, like the Valor and Creation bards get, but an alternative. This is nice, but use cutting words and you are handing out fewer inspirations. And buffing a saving throw is still the gold standard in uses for inspiration dice. And then at 6th, additional magical secrets. This is what you came for. 2 more spells from any list, and they don't count against your spells known, which is a big deal for a bard. Do just 2 more magical secrets matter when you're already getting 6? Yes. Yes, they do. There is a point of diminishing returns, but 8 isn't it, and getting it early counts. Want to be a better controller? Counterspell. Better healer? Revivify. Want to show a swords bard how to do real melee damage? Spirit Guardians. Or how about a familiar? 14th adds Peerless Skill. You can use your own inspiration die, but only for ability checks. I love making all my important skill checks, and this nearly guarantees it. Although you were already making most of the ones that count, so this won't be a dramatic change, and this is pretty late in the game. Probably the best use is to raise your initiative, which is a fine use. Overall, a very solid college that leans into what makes a bard good and makes a better bard. Which brings us to number 2, the College of Glamour. No one is fiercer or more fabulous. Lore bards like to control, glamour bards like it more. The battlefield belongs to them, as does everyone's heart and soul. Again, do you see why the devil loves this college? Level 3, Mantle of Inspiration. Give your allies some temp hit points, and then let them take an extra movement without fear of opportunity attacks. This is the perfect way to start a battle, and then rearrange one, and then to escape if things look dark. I've seen multiple guides that speak about this as if the temp hit points are the big deal. Sure, those are nice, and lessens the sting of this costing an inspiration die, but is the movement which is the big deal. It's a get-out-of-jail-free card, plus huge advantage. Your rogue gets stuck in melee? Not anymore. The enemy break through the lines to encircle your wizard? Not a problem. Your paladin can't get past their front line to reach their spellcaster? Now he can. The battle begins with your team too far away to do anything in the first round? Now they're all closer. This gives you control over the battlefield. And also, enthralling performance. This is the College of Glamour, and this will define your bard. You perform for 1 minute, and you charm up to 5 of the listeners for the next hour with no one ever knowing you did it. This is like the College of Whispers feature that I rated so low, except better in every way. Instead of fear, it causes charm, a much better condition in social situations, and one which is never bad to have on someone. Instead of 1 person, it affects up to 5. Instead of being private, you can do this in public, or private, either way. Most guides give this a weak rating as it's of no help in battle, and as it takes a minute, it seems situational. But they're failing to see that you make that situation happen constantly. You should never not do this. Approaching a castle? Charm the guards at the gate. Stop by a pub? Charm the drinkers. Go shopping? Charm the shopkeepers. Camp in the woods? Charm your own party. Get captured by kobolds? Charm them. Visit the dwarven royal court? Charm the king and his retinue. This is how you become a wealthy performer. This is how you gain important information. This is how you eventually rule the world. At 6th, it's Mantle of Majesty. You can cast a command as a bonus action every round for a minute. That's extremely helpful. Bards are tight for spells, and here not only does this give a very useful spell, it gives up to 10 castings of it for free. The downsides are this uses concentration, so if you're doing this, you can't use any of your major control spells. And then there's that rule about bonus action casting. Since Mantle of Majesty is casting command, you cannot cast any other spell except a cantrip as your action. So you're not going to be making any super combos out of this. And while this is good, casting Hypnotic Pattern is even better for a big fight. So this is less your go-to option, and more another option after you run out of 3rd level spell slots, or above. For a few levels, you'll use this a lot, and it will make the bard much more capable and powerful on days with multiple combats. As you get into higher levels, this will fall out of your combat repertoire, though still nice when you want a non-lethal way to deal with a bar fight. And at 14th level, Unbreakable Majesty. Firstly, you become permanently gorgeous. Tell me you don't want that. Then, once per short rest, anyone attacking you must make a charisma save, or they must choose a new target or waste their attack. If they actually manage to hit you, they are disadvantaged against your next spell. Well, isn't that lovely? A great defense mixed with a great offense. So, worst case scenario, you're really safe. And best case, you're mostly safe, and your enemies are in a lot of trouble. Like the Lore Bard, the Glamour Bard isn't breaking new ground, instead taking what the Bard is good at and improving it, specifically control in battle, making it the best we've seen so far, and friendly persuasion out of combat. It works well, and is a riot to play. Taking us to number 1, the King of the Bards, the College of Eloquence. Like the 2 before it, the College of Eloquence leans into what the Bard is, and just makes it more of that. It empowers the Bard by massively increasing its ability to inspire others and making enemies more vulnerable to its spells. The features. Silver Tongue. Your persuasion and deception skill check rolls can never be lower than 10. It's a slimmed down version of the rogue's reliable talent, but that's an 11th level feature, and a great one then. Here, at 3rd level, it is fantastic. The Eloquence Bard is the best face in the game. Why fight? Persuade your enemies to go away. That is in competition for the best 3rd level feature we've seen, and it's nowhere near the Eloquence Bard's best 3rd level feature. That happens to be Unsettling Words. You can now apply your bardic inspiration to your enemy's next save. Well, this is the feature. If you can get your enemies to fail their saves against you, you can destroy them. Save or suck spells like Hold Person or Dominate Monster that are normally questionable because they may do nothing have suddenly become reliable. And you can use this repeatedly on a boss to keep it locked down. Yes, you're trading your inspirations, but it's worth it. This is one of the strongest features in the entire game. With 3rd level so good, you'd think 6th might falter a bit. But nope, not with Unfailing Inspiration. If an ally fails when using your inspiration die, it gets to keep the die. Unsettling Words was so good that you might never be using your inspirations. But now that your inspirations are this reliable, it's time to split the difference. Plus, Universal Speech. You can magically speak to a number of creatures who don't normally understand your language once per long rest. And if they can understand you, you can persuade them. It's good. And probably as often as you'll need it, though you can spend a spell slot to get it back early. And to cap it off, at 14th, it's Infectious Inspiration. If an ally succeeds in a roll using your bardic inspiration, you use your reaction to gift the die to another ally. Combined with Unfailing Inspiration, this means a single inspiration will bounce around your party for an entire battle, active every round. Now it's 4 dice for Unsettling Words and 1 for Inspiration because 1 is all you need. The College of Eloquence Bard is the best buffer in the game, the best face in the game, and the best single target controller in the game. The devil is a Glamour Bard fan, first and always, but this college is amazing. And that's it. College of Swords, College of Whispers, College of Spirits, College of Valor, College of Creation, College of Lore, College of Glamour, and College of Eloquence. I don't think there are many surprises there. Some people put the Swords Bard higher, but that almost always involves multiclassing. And the Devil has Glamour a spot higher than usual, but when I played one, it certainly proved its power to me. People who place Armor above all tend to have Valor a touch higher, and Creation can bounce all over a ranking depending on how someone is interpreting the very vague rules. But generally, Eloquence and Lore toward the top, Swords, Whispers, and Spirits toward the bottom. That's the norm. And I hope you enjoyed that, and perhaps it might help you in making your Bard. If so, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll be back to continue my series of videos on the Bard. The class has seduced me. Let it seduce you too.